everyone. Today I'm super excited to be hosting Karishma, who is also an incoming candidate at Harvard Business School. We'll be talking about her journey. So, with that, I'm glad to have you, Karishma. Can you please introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Abhijay. Hi, everyone. My name is Karishma. I am a chartered accountant by education and a management consultant by profession. I've spent roughly the last 4 years of my career with as a consultant, started as a consultant with Boston Consulting Group, and I've worked across industrial goods, energy, healthcare, social impact, and the public sector industries within BCG. Prior to BCG, I did my internship for CA with Ernst& Young in the transfer pricing international taxation team. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Thanks, Karishma, for giving that. That brings me to the first section in this video. So let's talk about your transition to consulting. So how did a CA get interested in consulting? And can you talk a little bit about your transition from EY to BCG?
Sure. So by the time my internship was over, I actually spent 3 years in EY's TP team. I wanted to do something very different because for 3 years I was doing something specific, which is tax. And I was looking at a lot of career options. As a qualified CA, you actually have tons of opportunities within the traditional CA wings, such as audit or taxation or something outside. And as I was looking at options outside, management consulting with me, mostly because of its generalist nature. And after doing something which was so specific for so long, I was very curious to learn more about businesses and how they work in general, outside of the finance or tax departments. That's kind of why I got interested in consulting. And BCG at the time seemed like the best fit for me. And fortunately, I got to work with them for so long.
Awesome. So when this transition happened, what were some of the common skills that you could carry across from your role as a CA into consulting, and what were some of the new things that you had to pick up in this role at BCG?
As a CA, the focus, as you might know from the name itself, is a lot on analytics or on finance or on accounts. These are our core subjects, and numbers were something I was good at from school and something I was very interested in. So the core analytical skills that you develop as a chartered accountant are very, very useful in consulting as well. Other than that, because I was in EY, we were groomed from an early stage in client interaction to some, not a lot, but at least a little bit. I feel like that's an edge we bring in to consulting over others who are not from the same field. Those were two qualities I found very useful. Something which was new was because it was so generalist, let me give you an example. We were given a module, something like you're supposed to own from start to end. I was not used to doing that. I was more used to kind of getting instructions on these are the things that you're supposed to be doing as an intern.
Right.
And also because I was in tax, there's a very limited set of laws or rules that you have to follow, and you find your answer there. But consulting felt like a pool of uncertainty, and you're supposed to navigate your way through it. You'll find help along the way, but you are supposed to own everything from start to end. So that shift in mentality, that I will get this done, you tell me if it's right or wrong, versus what am I supposed to do, that I felt was the biggest mental shift for me in BCG and the biggest learning as well.
Awesome. So I think a lot of there'll be aspiring CAs who will be watching this. So for somebody who wants to transition to consulting, do you have any tips for them in terms of this transition?
I do. I feel like you should take the time out as early CAs. It kind of depends on where you are as a CA. This was my first job after qualifying as a CA. So that time, as part of BCG's interview process, I was assigned a buddy for a month who worked with me to develop my communication skills, my problem solving skills, two skills that are very core to consulting. So if you're an early CA, you should spend more time developing these. And obviously, since the interview is a case-based interview, in most consulting firms, solve cases, practice cases. That's what we tell anybody who is shortlisted for an interview. So spend the time doing that. Versus someone who has been a CA for very long or who's a tenured or experienced CA. For them, it makes more sense to get experience in strategy teams of maybe industries or in other companies.
Hmm.
And once you have that experience, then it's easier to transition into a consulting firm.
Awesome. That's really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Now let's move on to the next segment, which is around careers in BCG. So just want to understand, like, let's start with the question on what was the coolest case that you did at BCG?
Incidentally, not a case, but a secondment that I got the chance to work on as part of BCG. There was an interesting fund which had been set up called Act Grants in the early months of COVID-19 in March 2020. And I got the chance to work on the Act Grants case as part of BCG, as a case in BCG, but that turned into a year-long secondment with them. They are a bunch of people, essentially people from the VC and startup ecosystem, who decided that they wanted to do something about COVID. So they put together 100 crores of their own money, or the money that they'd raised from their personal networks, and they started giving grants to all sorts of startups or companies or any organizations engaged in COVID-19 relief. So from providing oxygen therapy to the public, or to funding drones in the city to make sure people are not breaking quarantine regulations. We funded a lot of different types of companies. I feel like that was my coolest case because that had the most impact that I could see very immediately on ground.
Very, very noble and very impressive at the same time. So, looking at your career in BCG, do you see that there are opportunities to move within BCG? How flexible are they in terms of this movement?
There are actually tons of opportunities to move within BCG. Just because of the global nature, you can choose to work in a different country for some time in the form of temporary transfer, which is something that I pursued myself. You could choose to work temporarily on a case in another country in the form of a cross-office staffing. And I'm just listing down things from the top of my head, so I might miss a few things. You could do a secondment like the kind I did, where you get to work as part of the client's team in the client, and you don't have any other people from BCG with you. That's another. There are actually many opportunities. You could also work with BCG's own backend teams. Tons of other things you can do. Very flexible. However, you do need to spend a bit of time in the firm so that the firm gets to know you, your performance, and accordingly take that decision on whether you can do any of these things that you choose to do. So typically there will be a tenure requirement from 12 to 18 months or so.
Yes, thanks for sharing that perspective. I also saw on your profile that you did work in Dubai for a while, right? And you were earlier based in Mumbai. So how was that shift like for you? And did you face or experience any changes in work culture in the two offices?
However, I didn't spend that long in Dubai. I got to work on one case in the public sector practice area in the Dubai office, and then the Harvard admit. So therefore, I had to reshuffle my priorities and take some time off. So because of that, I spent about 9 months there. From the 9 months that I spent there, the biggest difference that I saw was the diversity that the Dubai office offered. By the time I had moved, it was globally the most diverse BCG office, with more than 60 nationalities working in one office.
Wow.
Versus in India, where there wasn't as much diversity as I saw in Dubai. So just the chance to work with people from so many different countries and get their perspective on life, on careers, and everything was honestly an eye-opener, and it was a very, very good experience. Outside of that, a few other changes were the kind of clients that we worked with, because I'd never really worked in public sector before. And the Middle East region is more public sector oriented cases than other practice areas. So that was refreshing for me. These were the two main differences that I found in my shift.
Awesome. Awesome. And in terms of your learning, right? Like, since you have been with BCG for a while now, so what was your most significant learning? And any tips if you have for people who are joining BCG as analysts and want to grow within the organization?
So my most significant learning was actually kind of what I was hoping for when I shifted to consulting, which is that if you have a passion for something and an interest for something, you can do it no matter what your background is or what your qualifications are. As a CA, I was initially very skeptical of whether I can, work in an agrochemical company, for example, which was actually my first case,
Right.
because I had absolutely no exposure to chemicals or to anything remotely related to those, even in school or in college. So I was very skeptical of whether I would be able to do a good job, whether I would be able to even understand that industry. But with management consulting, what I realized was that it's not easy, but once you put the effort in, you can grasp these things, even if it's not in your background. So it kind of gave me the confidence to pursue anything that I want to do without having any kind of doubt about what my background is, that nothing can stop you into doing what you want to do. That I felt was my biggest learning. The generalist nature of consulting kind of helped me get to that. And you mentioned tips for analysts who are joining the organization.
Right.
What I found most useful in my journey was making contacts early on, or finding the opportunities to network within the firm early on. So from joining internal clubs to asking your buddies or asking other people to connect you with their friends within the
Right.
firm, that helps a lot. Because while my first case wasn't something that I selected by choice, all the cases going forward, or all the kind of projects that I wanted to work on, I got to choose, or at least play some part in its selection, because of the fact that I could, reach out to people or have those
Right.
connections in place. So you can determine your journey to a great extent if you choose those if you make those friends or that connection early on. I feel like people should invest more time in doing that. Sometimes I've seen people not do it. So
Awesome. This is really valuable tip for people who are, newly joining the consulting firm. So thanks for sharing. With that, let's now, of course, you're going to Harvard, which is very exciting. And there'll be a lot of people curious about your journey, how you went about the application process. So we'll discuss that in this Why MBA section. So the first question, of course, on the top of a lot of people's heads would be, how can future applicants make their profile stronger? Because let's say somebody now has 1 or 2 years of experience and they want to apply 2 years down the line. So any advice for them to make their application or profile stronger?
Personally, when I went about the application process, I hadn't even decided that I want to do an MBA, say 2 years before I applied. So I didn't do this myself. I didn't actively try to make my profile stronger. I just did what I felt like doing and hoped that my story would be good enough for business schools. But I can tell you, or at least what I felt from my profile that they liked was the fact that you're kind of the driver of impact, or you're driving change in some way or another. So 2 years before you choose to apply, try to actively look out for opportunities which will help you do it, and stick to your field, or what you're passionate about, because that comes out automatically from the story. If it's a force fit, then it looks as such to the people who are evaluating you. But whatever you choose to do, try to see if you get the chance to drive change. It's a very general or a vague statement, but any kind of instances that people can show, or examples that they can give, that they drove this, or had a team
Right.
which they were um, heading to drive it, that helps. So that's something that you can look out for 2 years in advance. It may be in the same company that you're already in, or it can be something different.
Awesome. I think that's really, it can be contextualized according to the field you are in, but it's always possible to drive impact. Thanks for sharing that. My next question is around, for people who have been staying with the same firm, and that's been their first job. So is it possible for such people to drive impact in this field? So I know both of us have been with the same company for some years now, but wanting to hear your perspective on this.
Very much so. This was actually a doubt in my mind, let's say, when I was applying to. But then when I reflected back on what I have done, or what opportunities I got, it is definitely possible to drive that change even within the same firm. So for something like, for example, BCG, because it gives you opportunities to move around, to explore various other industries, uh, you can actually, drive change there, or do a secondment, or go to a different geography, and do different projects there. It's possible to drive change honestly anywhere. Like you said, both of us are testament to that. So I
Exactly.
don't
Yeah.
think moving firms is necessity.
Yes, and for my firm, it's not a consulting firm. So we know we are also in the same field and not changing that, but it's also possible to drive impact even if you're in the same field. Many thanks for sharing that, Karishma. And there's also sometimes a confusion around, should you work with an admissions consultant or not? What would be your advice on that front?
For me personally, the reason I decided to work with an admissions consultant were I felt I was a little late in the process and I didn't have enough time to do all the research I needed to do on my own, or I didn't have enough knowledge about what is expected of me in terms of timelines or in terms of the to-do list that we have. Uh, I was actually pretty clueless. So I decided to work with an admissions consultant for one, the resources in terms of their analysis of different universities, what they're looking for, what their courses are, etc., etc. Number one was that. Second was their time management or their uh, pushing me to get things done. And the third thing was the most important I felt, which was prep with the interviews once we are shortlisted. So I actually did a lot of interview prep sessions with my consultant, and that helped me a lot.
Awesome. That would help people decide whether they would need to work with a consultant. So thanks for sharing that. So in terms of the admission process, right, like this application process, there are multiple, let's say, items to be fulfilled. So in terms of this, which items do you think should be, taken care of first to make the process easier for everyone?
I'm assuming we're not talking about things like GMAT or stuff like that, which is naturally the first step that they need to take care of. Outside of that, there are a couple of high lead time items, like, for example, getting a letter of recommendation. For that, you need to know who your recommenders are well in advance. You need to speak to them, need to get their inputs on what, whether they're willing to be your recommenders, A and B. What do you want to talk about? That is one thing that people should actually start doing much earlier, at least deciding who their recommenders are going to be. If they start way early, they can even actively speak to them to get those opportunities we spoke about. Like if there's enough time and you've decided that you want to do an MBA, you can work with someone who's going to potentially be your recommender, and they all obviously have feedback for you depending on the way you work. So they can tell you that feedback and you can ask for opportunities to work on it. That's one thing that people can do way in advance. Second would be the story, which was going to form part of your essays. So see how you can look out for opportunities which make your story stronger earlier. And then it's just a question of how you draft it. Like 2 months in advance, you can't really change what you've done, but just how you present it, right? Or which aspects of the story you really focus on. So working out your story a little bit in advance, brainstorming with 2 or 3 of your closest friends or colleagues who know you very well. Another suggestion would be not have more than 2 or 3 people, because too many cooks are going to confuse you.
Yeah.
So speaking to people, figuring out that story bit is a little tricky because there'll be a lot of iterations on your essays. So starting that a little bit earlier will also help.
Awesome. Thanks for the tip on, getting started with the recommenders. In fact, I just made a video on 10 tips which audience can use if they want to get an awesome recommendation letter. So thanks for your tip there. So you talked about stories, right? To figure your stories out early. So if you don't mind sharing, what were some of the stories that you talked about in your essay, or at least at a very high level, what are some of the stories that you spoke about?
So while each university's essay is slightly different, or the questions they ask are different, with HBS, it was a very generic one. Like I'm forgetting the exact prompt, but it was
what more
basic.
Would you like us to know?
What more would you like to talk about yourself? So it's so generic. You can talk about your professional life, you can talk about your personal life. For me, some people actually shy away from talking about their personal life. But my essay was actually 100% about something which was super personal, which happened to me at a very young age, and how I overcame that. So one story is, one part of your essays is don't shy away from your personality, because that's a key part of what universities are looking for, and don't stick to just the work ex part of your journey. Second story was, which was a part of the first, was about it was about a Broadway style musical that I was part of in BCG. For example, like I said, look out for any kind of opportunities in your firm which will help you make connections of friends. This was one of my attempts to do that, which turned out to be super, super fun and a very good experience. I was a lead actor in a Mamma Mia style, Broadway style rendition of Mamma Mia. And we spent hours, days practicing for this and ultimately performed in front of more than 600 BCGers at the annual offsite. And I wrote about this in my essay because it was honestly a turning point for me in my personal journey. So that was one of the things I wrote about, which was something I was really proud of doing in BCG outside of consulting.
Awesome. Sounds very interesting stories. So, but let's say if you had to now revisit this, process again or do it all over again, what is one thing that you would like to change?
Uh, I I wish I'd started earlier. I started roughly 2 months in advance, and that led to a lot of stress for me because I felt like I was way behind all of my peers in basic things like finding a consultant or starting on my recommendation letters or my story, for example. So I wanted to start slightly earlier than 2 months before the deadline. That's something I wish I would have done differently. But again, that was a result of me doing my GMAT late. So one thing I should have done is planned better earlier, like have a list of things that need to be done by their lead time, probably a couple, few months more before the deadline so that I can work backwards.
Awesome. That's very, it's a quite a helpful tip, especially because people who delay, starting the application and then they're rushing towards applying to 7 schools in round one, that can be really, really difficult.
Exactly.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Let's move on now to the little bit of a fun section. And the first question I want to ask you here is about the stress of the applications, right? Because people think that, okay, I'm done with the GMAT now, I've scored high and I'm going to go to a top school. But the applications themselves, at least I found them quite stressful. So how was that experience for you?
Likewise, I found them very stressful, more than quite a bit stressful. It was a lot more than what I had anticipated. And I had taken leave a few days of leave to work on the application as well, but I felt like that wasn't enough. At the end, you're rushing to, click submit after doing a long, long list of things that they ask for. So yes, it's very, very stressful. What helped me throughout the application was kind of having like a study partner equivalent or a buddy, one constant person whom I would interact with and who would keep me on my toes. And I would do the same for them. And this really, really helped me calm my nerves because it made me realize that I'm not alone.
Right.
Sometimes that's important to know because figuring things out on your own or keeping track of things on your own when you're already working on the side can be tricky. So it helped me manage the stress because we would keep track of each other's timelines. We would actually ask the other to report to us every week or every 3 days on what we've accomplished in those 3 days. So having that person who will help you and whom you will help was very helpful.
Awesome. I think, yes, although I didn't do something similar, but I think it's a great tip if you want somebody to always, at least somebody to check on you, to discuss ideas and bounce off certain ideas you have for a story. So that's very valuable. And I think the next big thing, once you get the interview invite, then you have like the interview which is going to happen in a few days. So how did you actually calm your nerves, especially when you were very close to the interview day? So how did you manage that?
So the rational thing that I did was the prep part.
Yeah.
I not just my consultant, but even with friends, it just helped to bounce off a few interview questions. Spoke to a few people who have done this before and who already had been admitted or had started school, and got a sense from them as to what interview questions they faced. Preferably people from the same industry as me or who have spent some years in the same industry as me, because then I could get a sense of their questions rather than someone in a completely different industry. So I did those mock interviews, those practice interviews, tried to think of questions that an interviewer would ask, and think of what I would answer for those. Those were the rational things I did. Normally, whenever I'm stressful, I remember the dialogue from Three Idiots, which is all is well. I keep repeating that till I've calmed my nerves down. So that's the
Yeah.
other thing that I did. And yeah, just the day of the interview, I didn't do anything. I just completely blanked. My mind spent time with my family, did zero prep. So that's something which helped me a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, Karishma, for sharing your entire journey, from your CEA background to BCG and now to, of course, Harvard. I think this will be helpful for a lot of the applicants and also, the career professionals who want to make a career in consulting. Before we sign off, what do you think is the best way for people to, connect with you, to reach out to you?
LinkedIn, the best possible way.
Okay.
Moderately active on LinkedIn, and I mostly follow whoever sends me a request. So yeah, that's probably the best way to get in touch.
Awesome. I'll pin up your LinkedIn then below in the description. So thanks a lot, Karishma, again for doing this. And we'll see you all the next time. Bye, everyone.